well, what about this verse right here in Deuteronomy? As I read through, I thought, well, this is Muhammad right here. And there's a distinction I want to make about that verse, which I never hear people saying. People say Deuteronomy 18:18, but what I never hear them mention is Deuteronomy 24:10. It says, never again in Israel did there arise a prophet like Moses. That's a distinction made. So we have on one hand the promise that we will have a prophet that will arise like Moses, but on the other hand, we have a promise that never again in Israel did there arise a prophet like Moses. So I thought, well, the promise is going to happen. God isn't going to take back his word. And if it's not in Israel, I don't know what the Christians believe. I saw multiple opinions. Some say it was Jesus. I know the Jews believe it was Joshua. So I thought, well, those are all in Israel. The only thing outside of Israel is Prophet Muhammad.
Now, these are passages that we normally go to Deuteronomy 34 to show that this doesn't talk about Muhammad. But you're right in that we normally don't go to verse 10. So you have Deuteronomy 18:15 and Deuteronomy 18:18. And basically the passages say that God is going to send a prophet like Moses. And he says, from among your brothers. We normally point out, okay, this is talking to Jews and it's saying from among your brothers and so on. If we want to go beyond that, we go to chapter 34, where it explains what it means to be a prophet like Moses. Now, Joshua, the son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. And the sons of Israel listened to him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. Since that time, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, for all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh, all his servants, and all his land, and for all the mighty power and for all the great terror which Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. So since that time, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses. And it sounds like you're interpreting this as no one who's from Israel could ever fulfill this. But if you look at this, Deuteronomy is written by Moses, and yet this ending is clearly put on afterwards. But I mean, I would interpret this to mean, hey, since that time, up until now, when we're putting the ending on the book of Deuteronomy, no prophet has risen like Moses, which, I mean, this would at least be 1000 BC, but probably 1400 BC or so. So a person is familiar with the events going up to the time of Joshua. So I'm just interested in if this is the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and then there's all kinds of stuff that happens much later in the history of Israel that's after that. I'm just wondering why you're interpreting this to mean that it doesn't have a Jewish fulfillment, and it has to be from someone outside of Israel.
By that, do you mean the Christians do believe Joshua fulfilled it?
No. You have a couple of interpretations. One, I mean, Christians generally believe that Jesus is at least the ultimate fulfillment, because you do have, and even Shabir maintains this position, I believe, that there's going to be a kind of series of prophets who are fulfilling this. No, what I mean is Deuteronomy is written. So the events here are about 1400 BC, and this would have been written sometime after after the death of Moses.
Right.
So the author who appended this little conclusion, he's familiar with the events of Joshua. And he says, but no one who really meets the criteria of someone like Moses has arisen up until I'm writing this. But that would have been shortly after 1400 BC. In other words, this is not being written in the time of Jesus. And he's saying no one in Israel has ever fulfilled this.
You're insinuating that it was fulfilled prior to that time because they had already come way past the time by the time they're actually writing it down. So there could have been a fulfillment prior to when they were actually writing down the end of Deuteronomy.
No. I'm saying, okay, so let's suppose Moses dies, and let's suppose this ending is added on 20 or 30 years later, something like that. Mm-hmm. Even if he says, hey, this prophecy has not been fulfilled as of this time, that's very different from saying, therefore, no one for the next 14 centuries of Israel is a fulfillment of that prophecy. So this is a side issue from whether Jesus is the fulfillment of this prophecy. It's just that this isn't saying that no one's going to fulfill this prophecy in Israel. He's just saying, hey, here I am. I'm here in 1400 BC. And since that time, no one has fulfilled that prophecy. So that kind of leaves it open whether someone for, the next 1500 years is the fulfillment of it. And
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So the question is, why would this mean that someone from outside of Israel would be the fulfillment of this prophecy?
Well, I guess you are right in that, and that is a good way of looking at it, that they were writing never again up to that time. I know you mean now. you could be right. I'll have to look into that.
Okay, no problem. The other issue, and I'm just pointing this out. You obviously don't have to answer unless you want to. But we also focus a lot on the rest of verse 10 and then verse 11. So since that time, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, for all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh. And so one of the things we draw attention to is that when it's talking about being like Moses, because if you're obviously familiar with Zakir Naik, and Zakir Naik will say, but Moses was both a prophet and a military general. Muhammad was both a prophet and a military general. And so he'll go on these parallels. Whereas in context, it seems like when they're talking about, hey, this guy's like Moses, they're thinking primarily of having some special intimacy with God that you could call face-to-face knowledge, and also miraculous works, performing miracles from God. And so the question would then become, how did Muhammad felt? Because Jesus obviously had that kind of face-to-face intimacy with the Father, and even according to the Bible or according to the Quran, was known for miraculous works. Whereas when we get to Muhammad performs all kinds of miracles in the Hadith. In the Quran, not so much, and it's kind of difficult to make any case for miracles from the Quran. So anyway, you can respond if you want, but other than that, if you want to claim that Muhammad is a fulfillment of the prophecy in Deuteronomy, those are some things to think of. To think about.
Well, another reason. This I don't currently hold, but one of the things that I originally accepted it on was, I guess, Isaiah 42. Currently, I don't hold the belief that is who I think the suffering servant is, Israel. And then, but I don't know how to contend that viewpoint with later the verses about like Selah, and they'll sing a new song from the mountaintops and things of that nature, because or Kedar, that would seem like it is talking about an Arab nation, or at least in that area as it was naming. But I don't see how that, we certainly know Jesus didn't go there, and the Jews aren't going in there and evangelizing. So I used to hold that viewpoint. That was another reason that I joined, but I currently don't hold it. I think the suffering servant of Isaiah 42 is Israel.
As far as the Selah and stuff like that, the Muslim claim is that this actually refers to, they'll say this refers to this mountain in Medina or something like that.
Yeah.
That's actually a city a little south of Israel. It's a city of the Edomites. And so now it's always open to Muslims to say, even though, yes, there's this city called Selah right there, it's still a prophecy. There's still this greater fulfillment in that it's actually referring to Medina or something like that. If you don't just look at Isaiah 42 and you actually go through the rest of the book of Isaiah and you start making the connections to these things that are spoken about there, not a very strong case for.
Well, that's exactly that's exactly how I changed my view. Because before I was just reading it from 42 to 43. And then I'm like, okay, but then when I went back to the Old Testament, I started saying, okay, that to me doesn't seem like that in the slightest. To me, it seems perfectly clear as being Israel, as throughout the Isaiah. If you read Isaiah from chapter 1 to the end, you see it is constantly referred to as the servant. So as returning to that, still as a Muslim, I returned to that and was like, okay, maybe I need to drop that viewpoint.
Well, that's good, because you did say that you don't just go along with what Muslim apologists
opinion, exactly.
say. Yeah. So no, that's good.